Welcome to my Days of Our Lives official channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Drink to my Days of Our Lives sanctioned channel. I hope everyone is having an awful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this videotape a thumbs up. Eric blazoned that he'd gotten Jude down for a nap. Sloan sarcastically replied that he'd said that 10 twinkles before. After he mentioned that he'd ask Brady to babysit and to be Jude's godfather, Sloan pressed Eric about moving the christening fests back to the cantina. She claimed Roman might be hurt else, and Eric wondered if she was more upset about keeping the christening in the family or keeping Nicole out of it. Sloan admitted that she did not know why they were involving the woman who had abducted Jude, but Eric combated that Nicole had apologized and that he wanted Holly to feel included in the event. Brady arrived and intruded Eric and Sloan's argument. Sloan brusquely told them to have a nice day and stormed out the door. When Brady asked about Sloan's snappiness, Eric said she was exhausted because Jude had had a rough night. Talk turned to Jude's christening, which Eric verified would take place in a couple of days. Brady assured Eric he wouldn't miss it, which urged Eric to ask if Brady would do him the honor of being Jude's godfather. Eric was surprised and confused when Brady replied that he could not accept. Brady explained that while he considered the request an honor, he didn't want to assume any liabilities associated with motherhood because he'd squinched up his own kiddies' lives. He bemoaned how he'd lost guardianship of Rachel and slightly saw her, and also he streamlined Eric on Tate's rearmost run heft with the law. Brady called Tate spooked, impulsive, and in love and noted that he'd presumably reply the same way as his son. He mused that it was inheritable and that Tate was taking after his father. Eric assured his family that he knew Brady would do anything for his kiddies and that if he did not agree to be Jude's godfather, Eric would be stuck with Leo Stark. Brady ultimately agreed, and he and Eric hugged. Brady commended in Eric his solicitude that Holly was keeping quiet about the overdose to cover herself and that Tate would keep paying the price for her falsehoods. When Eric suggested Holly was confused, Brady said he wanted to believe that but felt as if she was putting her need for blessing ahead of Tate. Eric mentioned that he'd gotten the print Holly was hiding commodity when he'd last seen her. He promised to talk with her again, and Brady expressed gratefulness for Eric's help. Sloan ran into a bout over Leo at Horton Town Square and asked him if he'd socialized too hard forced. Patrick's Day. They gagged about Sloan's incense, which Leo claimed made him want to toss my Eiffels, and about the world-class bow wow and green beer Leo had consumed. Sloan cracked that Leo was getting what he merited for going drinking on her song. Leo reminded Ms. Snarky Pants that it was his song and affirmed he was getting bothered and intolerant for his daily allowance. Sloan wrote Leo a check and said it wouldn't bounce because she knew how to keep a budget. Leo protested that his budget was in trouble because he'd bought a suit so he could look fabulous at Jude's baby christening. Sloan was in unbelief that Leo wanted to attend, but he reiterated that he'd a special connection born out of bearing him with Jude. Sloan demanded Leo return the suit and get a refund because he'd not be going to the christening. Leo appertained to Sloan as Dr. Evil's henchwoman and called himself Jude's pup godmother. Sloan remarked that Eric would be asking Brady to be the godfather, and an offended Leo offered to make Jude a celebrity by putting his picture in the Spectator if Leo could attend. Sloan berated Leo for trying to humanize himself, but Leo defended his connection with Jude and reminded Sloan that if it was not for him, Jude wouldn't be in the world. He also wondered why Melinda got to be the godmother, and Sloan snapped that Melinda had not blackmailed her. Leo claimed again that he watched about Jude and that he wanted a ringside seat for one of the most important moments of the boy's life. He told Sloan if she didn't invite him, he'd be forced to advertise the verity about the baby she would stolen from his real mama, who still grieves for him. Leo left, telling Sloan, "See you there." At the extension, John indicted Steve of lying to his face and angrily asked his friend if Steve had ever planned to tell him the verity about Constantine's son. John allowed it ironic that Constantine would be the one to give him the verity. Steve tried to explain that he'd been hysterical of how John would reply. When Steve claimed that Constantine didn't know what had truly happened himself and worried, John responded, "I took the life of an innocent woman. A real person. Somebody's daughter. I killed her." Marlena supplicated John not to torture himself and reminded him that he'd been an awful man and father. A killing machine, John said before stating his intention to turn himself in. Steve encouraged John not to discipline himself for a crime that had taken place times before in another country. A crime he couldn't flash back. John bemoaned how he'd considered himself one of the good guys, but how rather, he was a monster like the man who had trained him to kill. Marlena reminded John how he'd supported her when she had done unbelievable, inenumerable effects outside of her control. She credited his kindness and empathy with helping her forgive herself and wanted the same for John. When she claimed he'd changed from the man he'd been, John confessed that he'd done commodity dangerous and outside the bounds by helping Clyde break out of captivity. Steve comforted John that they had had no choice, but John nevertheless felt shamefaced about what Clyde might do while he was free. Steve protested when John said he'd apologized to Constantine for his treatment of the man. John defended Constantine as a grieving father and said if anyone had hurt Belle the way he'd hurt Constantine's son, he'd killed a person without vacillation. Steve apologized for keeping the verity from John, but John remained angry. John did agree, however, when Marlena asked that he not make any major opinions in haste. After she secured his pledge, she assured him with, "I love you, do not forget that part." At the DiMera manse, E.J. informed Stefan that Harris had told him about the firing. Upset Stefan asked E.J. however, and if he'd still help. J. responded by hotting his family and telling him to enjoy your last night as a DiMera. EJ had secured Stefan's transportation, his new identity, and his new position. He teased Stefan about his only options being captivity, death, or North Korea. An incredulous Stefan asked E.J. if he was joking about transferring his family to a freaking war zone. E.J. reminded Stefan that he wanted a country without an repatriation convention, and if North Korea wasn't over to his norms, the rainfall in Siberia is great. Stefan couldn't believe he was trusting E.J. with his life, and E.J. cracked that father always said starting over builds character. He told Stefan to pack light, and Stefan said the only thing he wanted was to say farewell to Gabby. E.J. remarked that would be a bad idea because of Clyde's captivity connection, and he offered to reluctantly put the cutter in Gabby's heart on your behalf. Stefan called him a vicious son of a wine but contended wife. J. to tell Gabby that he loved her. E.J. coldly refused and told Stefan he'd have to leave that night. J. suggested Stefan sneak out of city in the box of a auto. Stefan fumed that there had to be another way and asked E.J. to offer him a deal as Thed. Stefan grew mad and J. said no, and Stefan belittled E.J. for not helping him when he demanded it most. An angered E.J. reminded Stefan that his calamitous opinions were of his own timber and had nearly cost J's stepdaughter her life. Stefan riposted J. was helping himself to everything that was rightfully Stefan's and claimed that their father would be flipping in his grave for J's family disloyalty. E.J. believed Stefano would be proud of him for clearing the family of a son that had proven himself to be an absolute failure, a complete embarrassment, and a stain on the DiMera heritage. Stefan said it did not count what happened to him because he'd be miserable without Gabby. E.J. called Stefan's protestation romantic, in a morose kind of way, and said he'd tell Gabby where Stefan was hiding so the two could wallow in common misery. He instructed Stefan to leave through the coverts before Harris returned, and E.J. snidely said his farewells with a bon passage, family. Ava corrected Harris for leaving the apartment and defying his bed rest. They bandied Stefan's whereabouts, and Harris suggested Ava reach out to Stefan. Ava said she formerly had, but Stefan hadn't replied. Harris called Stefan a crazy bastard who would go to any lengths to cover Gabby. Ava again scolded Harris that he should not be running around like an action idol and ordered him back to bed so she could take care of him. Harris smiled and said he wouldn't argue. In the bedroom, Ava examined Harris and noted he'd a fever.